Step 2 is all about the weaving for our basket. You are going to need your already completed base with the stakes. You might need a pair of scissors just to trim any of your pieces. You're going to need the beads that you chose, and you are going to need the longer pieces of your material, and you are going to need to soak it for at least 20 to 30 minutes. So what I have done is I have taken pretty much the longest piece that I could find in my kit, and I had it in my water. You can see it's quite a long piece. I'm actually going to kind of try to keep some of it in the water so that it can stay soaking. But it's okay if it doesn't stay in the water. Now your stakes are not soaked. They should be okay as long as you work carefully as you are weaving. And I have found that as you're weaving with the soaked material, it does kind of transfer to the stakes, and they kind of get soaked a little bit as you are working. So the weaving process that we are going to do is just going to be an over one, under one weave. And what we are going to do, I'm actually going to weave towards the camera. So what you're going to do is you want to have the end of your first piece behind one of your stakes. It doesn't matter which stake, just behind one. And you want to have a little bit of a tail there so that it's not going to come out from behind that stake and stick out. So I have it just a little bit there behind my first stake, and then it's going to go on the outside of the second stake, and then I'm going to very gently move the stake so that I can put the next piece behind it. And I'm just going to continue doing this around my basket until I've used the entire piece. And that piece, what you're looking for is to get about 2, maybe 2.5 inches of height so that it'll look like my basket here. So I think this is actually a little bit less than 2 inches. But if you use one of the longest pieces that you have in your kit, it should give you about the right height. Now, just to kind of tell that you have done your weaving correctly, once you get to the beginning, it should change to the opposite of what you did in the previous row. So my first stake has my piece behind it. Now my piece is in front of it, and I'm going to go behind the next piece. Now, if for some reason you do have a problem with your stakes and it does end up breaking, all you have to do is just remove that piece, make sure you use a soaked piece of reed, and replace it just like you put your pieces in last time in part 1. I'm almost to the end of my piece. So what I'm going to do is I actually am going to have it so that it goes all the way to the end. And what I want to do is make sure that it ends behind one of the stakes. And actually the length of this one is pretty much perfect. I have that little bit that's still hanging out, so it's going to make sure that it doesn't flip out if that stake moves a little bit. But if for some reason you end up, let's say it ended up where it was hanging out on the outside, you would want to trim it to about here so that your last weaving part is going to be on the inside behind a stake. So I'm going to flip that there. So since I have my first one in, and it's about 2 inches, I think it's a little less than 2 inches, but that's fine. What I'm going to do now is slide my beads onto my stakes, and I have chosen a 2 of the same color bead pattern. So I'm just going to put 1 bead on each of my stakes. And then I'm going to be ready to start with my next piece. Now, with shaping of your basket, it all depends on how tightly or how loosely you do your weaving. So with my sample basket, what I did was I continued with about the same tension as I did for the bottom. And then as I started to make my way up the sides, I did my weaving a little bit looser so that it would flare out a little bit. So you might have to play around a little bit with it to get the shape that you want. But really all you have to do is, if you don't like how it looks, just unweave it and then do the weaving again. So I'm going to get another piece of my material, find my end. Try to untangle it a little bit. Now I have been doing my weaving facing the camera, but that is not how you have to do your weaving. You can weave with your working part right in the front. It'll be a lot easier if you do it that way, rather than reaching around your basket. But I'm doing it with it towards the camera so that the video is easier for you to see. I have been weaving baskets for almost 20 years now, so I am pretty skilled with the weaving and know what I need to be doing as I'm weaving. So what I want to do is find where I left off, okay, and I'm going to start at that location as well. So I'm just going to, just like we did when we first started, going to have my piece behind that stake and have a little bit of a tail hanging out. And that'll kind of be hidden as you go around that next row. And once again, I'm just going to go behind, in front, behind, in front. And what you want to do is kind of make sure that that material just sort of sits right on top of the beads. You don't want to push it behind or underneath the beads. You want to be able to see the beads. So there will be a little bit of a gap in your basket, but that's fine. It adds to the detail. And once again, as my test for my weaving being correct, you can see that when I get to the start, it's the opposite of what the previous row was. If you are weaving and you start to notice that your weaving is doing the same thing as the row before it, so if it starts looking like this, and they're all just kind of stacking up on top of each other, you want to take that weaving out and find where your mistake was. My mistake was right here, where I had 2 that were on the outside rather than 1 outside, 1 inside. So I'm going to just take my weaving out and I'm going to fix that mistake so that each of my rows is different from the previous row. So I'm going to continue going through, and then what I'm likely going to be doing is I will be adding another piece, and I will show you how to do that when I get to the end of my piece I'm working with now. gotten to the end of my next piece, and I want to show you how to add a new piece so that you can continue to get your height. What I do need to do is trim this one because you can see it came out on the outside of my basket. So I just want to trim it just enough that it's going to stay in place even if the stake moves around a little bit. And then I'm just going to take my next piece, and this can either be if you have completed the length of your piece, or if you notice that you might have a piece that might be damaged. You want to cut that damaged part away. You don't want to be working with a piece that may be broken. And then you just want to add it in the same manner. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to overlap my two pieces. So I'm taking this piece and I'm kind of going backwards in my weaving. So my end is right here, and I'm going to go 3 stakes back. So I have 1, 2, and then my third one. And I'm just going to kind of stack them up. One thing that I didn't really mention, but I'm hoping that you have noticed through watching the video, is that as you're weaving, you always want to be pushing these pieces down. You don't want to have your weaving way up here, because if you are weaving way up there, it makes it a lot more difficult to move it down in a large amount rather than your small amounts of just going through and then pushing down every time you go in and out of your material. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue going. What I want to do is leave about 4 inches at the top. That's going to give us enough length on our stakes to finish off our basket. And I'm going to work on getting a little bit of a flared out shape as I'm going. But you can do whatever you would like in terms of your shape. So you can see I've come back to the start, and I'm just going to weave it as normal, just kind of pushing them in place, and those overlaps will almost disappear in your basket. So the entire height of my basket is complete. I did have to add a couple of additional pieces to get the height that I wanted. And you can see I did kind of have a little flare at the top. And that, again, is just by weaving a little bit looser and allowing the stakes to kind of bend outward a little bit. It definitely takes a little bit of trial and error, but I hope that you will try to get some different shapes for your baskets. When I finished, I did make sure that it was in the back, once again, behind one of the stakes, and I trimmed it so that there was a little bit of an overhang, just to make sure that it's not going to pop out, especially at the top, because we're going to be folding these pieces, so those stakes are definitely going to be moving a little bit differently, and we want to make sure that we don't end up with our weaving coming out. So what I would like you to do is complete the steps that I have shown here in this video and take pictures and post them to the Google Classroom assignment. And stay tuned for finishing it up and doing part number 3.